Hello folks, and welcome back to Rugby Ascendant. And however you look at this, whatever your feelings are on this, if you're a Springbok fan or a fan of rugby or a supporter of World Rugby, however you look on this, it's just sad. This entire episode, this entire situation is really sad. What should have been an epic 12-year wait for an incredible series between the British and Irish Lions and the Springboks has turned out to be sour in every aspect. And I'll talk more about that shortly. Well, let's take a look at the headlines here that have occurred today in response to Rassie Erasmus's sanction. The Guardian, Rassie Erasmus banned from rugby for 2 months over Lions tour conduct. The Telegraph, Rassie Erasmus reputation in tatters after World Rugby bans Springboks director and demands public apology. The BBC, Rassie Erasmus banned from rugby for 2 months by World Rugby. Planet Rugby, 2-month ban for South Africa boss Rassie Erasmus. And RTE, Rassie Erasmus suspended for 10 months following Lions officials' rant. Wales Online, this devastating testimony of the referee, Rassie Erasmus left crushed with his public character assassination. Well, that's subjective, huh? The Mail Online, South Africa director of rugby, Rassie Erasmus is banned for 2 months after his tirade at officials during the summer's Lions tour, and he will miss their clash against England at Twickenham on Saturday. Vilified, compelling Barry testimony on damaging Erasmus attack from Rugby Pass. ESPN, South Africa's Rassie Erasmus found guilty of misconduct by independent committee. Independent? Really? They work for World Rugby. How exactly are they independent? But let's start with World Rugby's witch hunt against Rassie Erasmus, who upset the apple cart of the Good Old Boys network there at World Rugby. First off, let's be honest about what's going on here. World Rugby defends its opaque approach to this investigation by saying the following in paragraph 37. There are differences between the public being interested, the public interest, and the interest of justice. The starting point, as is clear from Regulation 20.1.8, is that ordinary hearings of this nature will take place in private. Nothing we have read or heard has shifted that presumption. We've also had regard to the interests of the witnesses, and in particular Nick Barry, who has already been subject of what we conclude to have been a great deal of unfair and unwanted public criticism, and worse, following publication of the Erasmus video. We're also concerned to ensure these proceedings did not develop into a spectacle detracting from the true issues we had to resolve. Well, you succeeded in ensuring it wasn't a spectacle, but you've not addressed the issues that need to be addressed here. Well, one thing that's certain about this entire episode, it has left a bitter taste in the mouth of rugby fans, at least objective rugby fans. I really look forward to this series, and I'm so disappointed in everything that occurred here. So, paragraph F in this report, 80-page report, it says, before the Erasmus video was made, Rassie Erasmus said he would go public and play out in the media his concerns. In his email sent to Nick Barry at 8:44 on the 25th of July, Rassie Erasmus said, just a heads up from our side, we feel the pressure which the Lions attempt to put on your team of 4 through media did actually work well for them. Double exclamation point. While we will be doing the same this week, I think you will note that ours is more factual and honest. That was as Rassie Erasmus accepted a clear warning to play out matters in public. That is exactly what happened with the release of the Erasmus video. We simply do not accept that a day or so after he threatened to go public on match officiating, the leaking of that video was a coincidence. In his oral evidence during cross-examination, Rassie Erasmus said this in his relaying message to Nick Barry. This will not get into the media. Just have a chat to me tonight. The implicit implication, the underlying premise of that statement is clear to us. Well, I don't disagree with World Rugby. If in fact this is what Rassie Erasmus said and his intent was to imply that they would go public with the video unless he had a meeting with him, that is inappropriate. That is in fact a threat, and Rassie Erasmus should be sanctioned for that. However, I'm not convinced by the report, and of course wasn't present or able to watch the hearings and testimony because they kept it opaque. Because as they said, this is private. Well, the world wants to know, the public wants to know, and what I have to say about this is I'm not at all convinced by the evidence given here and what they argue. It's simply not compelling evidence. In paragraph G, further, it was contrary to the interests of Nick Barry, his coach, the World Rugby staff, and officials to leak it, the video. We're satisfied in the evidence that no member of the SARU staff or official would do so without Rassie Erasmus' permission or authority. Seriously? Are you serious? You're claiming that nobody on the Springbok staff, amongst the 5 people he gave it to and then the 40 members of the team and staff that he gave it to, would have ever leaked this? Are you delusional? That's your conclusion. What evidence do you have for that? The White House is a sieve, especially during Republican administrations. People betray the president all the time, leaking information to the press. Members of Congress do it all the time. The most powerful figure on the planet, the President of the United States, can't keep a secret in the White House. And you think that Rassie Erasmus is more powerful than the President of the United States? This is simply ludicrous on the basis of it. This is an unreasonable finding on the part of World Rugby. Absolutely ridiculous. Just simply not the case. Anyway, it goes on here, this report. In Section 141, they say there's a human element to this case, which we've been concerned not to lose sight of. While Rassie Erasmus and Saro concentrated their attentions on the treatment of Sia Khaleesi, it is Nick Berry who was vilified in the Erasmus video. We had over an hour to observe and listen to Nick Berry as his account was tested and challenged before us. How? We had no hesitation in accepting his evidence. It was measured, and he made concessions where appropriate. He had no motive to lie, exaggerate, or mislead. We were impressed by his quiet dignity, humility, and the restraint he showed during his evidence. Well, not only did he lose sight of what was going on here, he reacted as if you were observing a kitten trapped in a tree. Poor little thing, let's save it. All right, Nick Berry and his personal feelings are not the issue here. This is what this whole witch hunt has become. The character assassination of Nick Berry. Most of us didn't even know Nick Berry was on the pitch. Those of us paying attention to the game didn't care that Nick Berry's there. And many people outside the close-knit world of rugby don't even know where Nick Berry's from. They have no idea. Utterly ridiculous. This becomes save a poor kitten trapped in a tree by the fire rescue team. That's what this entire thing is about. It's not about the integrity of the game, although they claim that repeatedly. It's about the integrity of Nick Berry, which, in my view, wasn't in question. He made bad calls. Doesn't mean he's a bad guy or evil. Doesn't at all mean that. It's ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous to take this approach. World Rugby officials are not infallible. We've seen Romain Poix, yellow card against Bismarck du Plessis, overturned by the International Rugby Board, IRB, the predecessor name of World Rugby. We have seen Craig Joubert, one of my absolute favorite referees and arguably one of the best rugby officials ever. His call in the Rugby World Cup between Australia and Scotland overturned. Not overturned, but it said it was a mistake. You can't overturn it. The game was over. And instead of getting a scrum, Australia got a penalty and won the game 35-34. Officials make mistakes. Nick Berry's reputation is not on the line here despite this effort to turn this into a crusade against Nick Berry, which it wasn't. So there's a human element. No further words are necessary from us, paragraph 143. That is the human cost of Rugby Erasmus's conduct. It is that cost which he and Saro have yet to acknowledge. And there you have it. Facts be damned, Erasmus is guilty of impugning the reputation of an official and by extension, World Rugby. We cannot tolerate that, regardless of why we got to this point. The horrible officiating against the Springboks in that match after Warren Gatland attacked Marius Jonker before the first match, criticizing his selection as the TMO because he's South African. This is all related to the COVID nonsense. So Gatland starts this. Gatland is not investigated. Gatland is not persecuted. Gatland is not fined. His reputation not impugned. Rassie Erasmus shows a video in which, for the most part, he's objective, and suddenly it's all about Nick Berry and Nick Berry being attacked and Nick Berry's feelings. It's not about that. So there you have it, folks. It's not about what occurred. It's about how World Rugby looks. It's about virtue signaling. It's about protecting its officials. Now, a striking feature of Rassie Erasmus' evidence in the submissions made in mitigation is the failure to acknowledge that any part of the content of the video was abusive, insulting, or offensive. Paragraphs 72 and 73. Further, there's been no apology to Nick Berry. That's a matter for Rugby, Rassie Erasmus, and Saro. We don't punish him for that, nor do the fact that he and Saro fought the case. That's their right. However, it deprives him of mitigation and acknowledgement of fault, and an apology would otherwise have afforded. So the only way Rassie Erasmus gets a break is if he admits guilt. So you're determining his guilt because he would not admit guilt? This is ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. So you're saying he would only get a less severe punishment if he admitted he was guilty before you determined he was guilty. That's absolutely asinine and insane. Well, with that respect, he appears not to appreciate the corrosive effect his behavior has on the game more widely, as well as the viewing public and press. We cannot see how such conduct improves his standing of moral authority in the eyes of his players or informed observers. It's paragraph 145, informed observers. So you're insulting those of us who call into question your conclusions. Seriously? The effect on the game? Packed stadiums in Cardiff last week for the Springboks and Wales, at Twickenham, Dublin, and Edinburgh this weekend. Packed, sold-out venues. What impact did Rassie Erasmus have on the game? Fans have been hungry to go back to stadiums after the fascist actions that have kept fans from attending rugby for the past 2 years. If anything, Rassie Erasmus' video seems to have the opposite effect. People are talking about rugby, and they're asking about why officiating is so uneven in World Rugby. It seems to have zero effect. So that's a non sequitur that he has disrupted or had a corrosive effect. It's ludicrous. If anything, his behavior as a water boy has had a corrosive effect on the game. It looks absolutely ridiculous. How about you talk to him about that? Of course, he didn't violate the rules, but he did violate the spirit of the game. But you're not talking about that. Now, you've determined in paragraph 8 that the detrimental effect of Nick Berry has not been inconsiderable. Well, so says Nick Berry. But few people know who the guy is, and objective fans have not ganged up on him. I have no problem with Berry calling games. But this smokescreen to cover up what happened after Gatland called the game in ill repute does not paper over what happened in this series. It does not paper over what happened in this series whatsoever. Rather than focusing on what actually occurred in that first match, after Gatland attacked the integrity of Marius Jonker and World Rugby took no action, either before the match or after the match or since, rather than focusing on that and then the subsequent biased officiating that occurred in the next match, whether it was intentional or it was, unknown to the officials on the field, it was clear that it occurred. And an objective analysis would determine that. No, we're not going to focus on that. What World Rugby says, viewed objectively, the Erasmus video was an attack on the impartiality and the integrity of match officials, which can never have any place in the game. No. We can't call into question the officiating. No, that's not for fans or for the press or for the public. Funny, though, how you rely on the press later on to criticize and condemn and convict Rassie Erasmus. So we're not allowed to have a voice about officiating. Officials have a tough job. They do. They're the most fit officials of any sport in the planet. Running up and down the field, they're more fit than a lot of the players. They have to run all over the pitch, while a lot of players in 15 stand around for a good portion of the game. Yeah, they have a tough job, make instantaneous calls. That's why we have television match officials, and we have side judges to help them. And most officials do their utmost best. Nick Berry does his utmost best. But this victim role that he's playing now is unwarranted. And the victim role that World Rugby is heaping into this story distracts from the real story here. The question about Warren Gatland's conduct, which has not been addressed, and then Rassie Erasmus' reaction to it. That is not being addressed here. World Rugby says this does not justify the insulting, abusive, and offensive way the message was delivered. The absence of a protocol does not help the respondents. That does not justify saying things that are abusive, insulting, or offensive. Rassie Erasmus was not abusive, insulting, or offensive. A couple of times, might have raised my eyebrow at a couple of things he said, but it was not abusive or offensive. That's just ludicrous. That is your unobjective, biased determination, World Rugby. In regard to Nick Berry's testimony, he had no motive to lie, exaggerate, or mislead. We were impressed by his quiet dignity, humility, and the restraint he showed during his evidence. He didn't present evidence. He presented his viewpoint, his observations from his perspective. That's not evidence. That's testimony. You're very confused about evidence. Evidence is DNA. Evidence is shell casings. Evidence is physical. Evidence is written. Evidence is recorded. He gave his first-person perspective. And that's his prerogative, and he should. But you dismiss Rassie Erasmus' comments out of hand, and South African Rugby Union's out of hand, and Jaco Piper's comments out of hand, as if they have something in this. We also accept without reservation that what he endured because of the publication of the Erasmus video has had a profound effect on him. Yeah, okay. And his actions on the pitch and his team's actions on the pitch didn't have a profound effect on the outcome of the first game and the second game and the third game? Come on, get serious here. Needless to say, the whole situation has been an extremely difficult time for my family and I. As a match official, I understand that our performances will be heavily scrutinized, especially in such a prestigious tournament. However, the public attack on my integrity and character is not something that should be tolerated in any workplace. Well, Nick, you're taking a little too much, your feelings are hurt a little too much. I don't see a personal attack on you. I don't view you in any less light. I don't view you as a poor official or as a corrupt or cheating official. Not at all. Just a guy who made mistakes and who reacted to the pressure from Warren Gatland. That's what I view. So your reputation's not in tatters. You're the one you worked so hard to become an international official. This investigation is in tatters, but not your reputation. No way. I feel that Mr. Erasmus engaged in a character assassination of me on social media. I've spent many years trying to build my reputation as an international referee. In the course of this video, which was posted online, Mr. Erasmus has caused immeasurable damage. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't view you differently. Don't have a negative view of you as a consequence of this. I do have serious questions would have yet to been addressed as this paper mache covers up what's really going on here. Instead of talking about what actually happened in that game, we're talking about Nick Berry's reputation being attacked. Most objective observers didn't see his reputation as being attacked. They saw Rassie Erasmus doing something that was out of bounds and questioning officials' comments, which we just don't see. That's what most people were focused on. And people actually who watched it objectively were a bit shocked when you compare how long the British and Irish Lions had for penalty advantage and how quickly it was over for the Springboks, time and time again. That's what people who are objective noticed, not an attack on Nick Berry's character. As I said, there were a couple of times an eyebrow would be raised, a couple of times. I felt that Mr. Erasmus' video brought into question my professionalism and my integrity as a match official, and that there was an inference to be drawn that I was in some way cheating as an official, which is obviously completely untrue. I didn't infer that you were cheating. I just observed what I thought were very poor calls. One observer. So I don't think that you need to feel aggrieved by Rassie Erasmus' comments at all. At all. Now, paragraph I of the 80-page report says, Rassie Erasmus, his misconduct has received widespread international attention and consequently brought the game considerably into disrepute. Really? Really? So World Rugby relies on the United Kingdom's The Times, the Daily Telegraph, and The Guardian in the UK, France 24, and Stuff in New Zealand to make this assertion. Now talk about bias and axes to grind against the Springboks. Seriously? The Guardian, the Daily Telegraph, France 24, and Stuff? Not exactly objective outlets, all of which New Zealand, France, and the UK, or England at least, have axes to grind against the Springboks and Rassie Erasmus. England, because he defeated them with the bomb squad, embarrassed them. The All Blacks, historical rivals. France, not happy with South Africa in its appearances. So not exactly objective or all-encompassing news sources when it comes to rugby. Where are the references to Japan media, South Africa media, Canada's media, Ireland, or USA sources? None of which are mentioned. Simply going right for the throat, and they're using this as a basis to convict him of guilt, saying he brought the game into disrepute. Hardly objective commentary from those news sources when this story broke. Listen, folks, at the end of the day, what should have been an incredible once-in-a-12-year event was marred by South Africa's hysterical reaction to the pandemic with 0 fans in the attendance. I waited 12 years to go to this series. I purchased jerseys, scarves, caps, commemorable balls, everything except a plane ticket because I couldn't go to South Africa because of the government's hysterical reaction. This is what should have been an incredible once-in-a-12-year event. The pandemic reaction, no fans, Warren Gatland's unpunished attack on Marius Jonker and his reputation, the pedestrian play by both sides in epically boring contest. This was so boring. Actually glad I didn't go to South Africa for it. Terrible officiating the first 2 matches, and this bigoted investigation that seems intent on relying on personal grievances, media headlines, and feelings as evidence of guilt rather than actual proof. World Rugby does have the right to sanction folks in its orbit, but the abject failure to address the issues reasonably presented in the Erasmus video leaves many with the impression the organization is more concerned with appearance than with improving the quality of the game. Further, the incessant mischaracterization of the video as abusive, insulting, and or offensive is shocking. The overwhelming majority of the video was unquestionably not abusive. There were a couple of times an objective viewer may have raised an eyebrow at a comment that Rassie Erasmus made in the video. But most folks outside of Oz do not even remember it was Nick Berry on the pitch or where the guy comes from either before the video or after the video. And this is the sad part about this. The disrepute brought into the game, if anything, is brought by World Rugby and its investigation. It was opaque. It was done behind closed doors. Now, I don't object to that. It actually makes sense. You don't want a spectacle, media spectacle. But you've determined the man's guilt based on newspaper headlines, based on the personal feelings and testimony of the official whose conduct was called into question, whose calls were called into question. You don't even address that. There's no mention of it whatsoever. None whatsoever. 80-page report, you ignore completely the whole justification for it, and you ignore the fact that Warren Gatland initiated this nonsense the week prior. No comment, no sanctions, no mitigating circumstances. This whole thing is just really sad. Really sad. For Rassie Erasmus, for rugby fans. But you know what? The game continues. Packed stadiums in Twickenham, Murrayfield in Edinburgh, and at Aviva Stadium in Dublin. Full of fans. Hungry for rugby. Really excited to come back to the pitch. And some of the Tier 2 nations getting opportunities this year against Tier 1 nations like USA, against England, Ireland, and the All Blacks. And Uruguay playing European sides as well as Tonga and Fiji. Japan as well. It's great, although Japan's really a Tier 1 nation at this stage. Well, folks, there you go. There's an in-depth analysis of the 80-page report. There's much more in the report, but these are the highlights. And it shows clearly a couple things. Rassie Erasmus's guilt was determined before this hearing ever took place. It also shows that the appearance for World Rugby is far more important than the underlying facts. They determined his guilt based on newspaper headlines in the UK, France, and New Zealand. They determined his guilt based solely on the witness commentary and testimony by Nick Berry, whose feelings were obviously hurt and not exactly an impartial observer here. And that's the evidence they used. They also used emails. And in the basis of that, at least one of these emails certainly does tend to give the impression that Rassie Erasmus was attempting to intimidate or threaten Nick Berry. And if he did, there's no place for that in the game or in life. It's not cool. That's bullying, and it's not right. And if Rassie, in fact, did that, if that was the intent, then he should be sanctioned for that. But to be guilty of all 6 charges without any obvious evidence whatsoever other than someone's feelings protecting a kitten trapped in a tree is not evidence of guilt. Nick Berry shared his view. Rassie Erasmus shared his view. Saru shared their view. None of it mattered. Clearly, World Rugby already was prepared to assign guilt and sanction Rassie Erasmus. And it's strange how this played out over a couple of months and occurs just before the epic Titanic clash between England and the Springboks. Well, there you have it, folks. There's my in-depth analysis of this situation. I hope that you found it useful. A lot of people will take issue with it. I'm not an unbiased observer. I am a Springbok fan, but I'm also a fan of the British and Irish Lions. It's an epic squad that's put together to travel to New Zealand, Australia, and South Africa, rotating amongst those countries. And it's a fantastic series. It's a shame. It's truly, truly a shame that the 2021 British and Irish Lions series will be remembered not for the quality of play on the pitch, but for the abysmal quality of play on the pitch, the boring nature of the games, the hysterical reaction of South Africa's unconstitutional lockdown restrictions which prevented any fans from being present, and for this spat, which Warren Gatland started, Rassie Erasmus elevated, and World Rugby has turned into an epic disaster. Thanks a lot, folks. Be sure to subscribe to the channel right below. And if you want to leave comments, go ahead. Just don't be abusive. I wasn't abusive to you. There's no reason for people to leave abusive comments, profanity, being insulting to people. No need for that. I have insulted you. No need to insult me. If you agree with me, you're welcome to. If you disagree with me, share your feelings, not your insults. Cheers, folks. Take care.